Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Radio Dayz, a podcast radio program that delves into the world of terrestrial radio. It's DJs and on-air personality, and you, all fans of radio as a medium. Here's your host, Ron.
Hello and welcome to Radio Dayz The Podcast. You can hear this podcast on BuzzSprout, as well as all the major podcast platforms like Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. You can also watch it via YouTube and at my website, ronrobinsonstudios.com. On today's show, which is brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage Group and Radio Dayz the docuseries, we are going to take a dive into the career of someone I met when I worked in Benton Harbor. She was the program director at WIRX, which was the sister station of WSJM and WYTZ, which I think she worked at later after I left where I worked. My guest today has also been heard on the air at WAOR in South Bend, KHQT in San Jose, California, KWOD in Sacramento, as well as WNCI in Columbus, Ohio. Did I mention she studied at California State University? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the amazingly talented Shelley Morgan O'Brien. Shelley, how are you? Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Ron. I'm good. Thanks so much for asking.
Now, before we get started, full disclosure, Shelley was good enough to come on because she's in a lot of pain. She's doing rehab. You just had surgery, right?
Yeah, total knee replacement on my left knee. So, yeah, enjoying the effects of the opioid medication.
Well, that's good to know. I was going to say you're braving the pain, but you are on those opiates. As you know, on this show, we talk about people that were in radio, and we talk about their career. But before we get into your career, Shelley, I want to get back to a young Shelley Morgan. What were you listening to on the radio when you were growing up?
Oh, I was listening to WLS in Chicago. I grew up in Southwest Michigan, and that baby, it was 50,000 watt clear channel. It went everywhere. And the radio was always on in the house. It was on the bus to school, so we would listen to Larry Lujack in the morning and hear animal stories on the way to school every day. Music was always playing in our house, and the radio was always on. If it wasn't WLS, it was WGN in the morning. My mom would listen to Wally Phillips, or our local in Niles, Michigan, WNIL was the AM station, and Rick Klingeman was the morning guy. And, later on in my career, I got a chance to work with Rick, and it was kind of fun because it was like, I love you. You were the guy who told me I didn't have to go to school on a snow day.
Isn't it weird? Isn't it weird to finally work, and we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but you brought it up. Isn't it weird to work with somebody that you grew up listening to and idolizing? It's a bizarre dynamic.
It is. And a couple of times working at radio stations with jocks who had gone from a large market station or from a major market station to a large station, and they would intro you, Shelley Morgan's up next, Don St. John from KFRC and John McFlanagan from KFRC are introducing me when I'm, working in San Jose, and your mind is completely blown. It's like, how does that happen? How do I get to work with them? How exciting is that?
And then I found, for me, it was Chuck Santoni, who worked at a station called WABX. He was my program director when I worked at a station called SAQ. But it's also weird because you have to contain that shit because it makes people uncomfortable. It's like,
right.
Don't be so gushy over me,
Exactly. And you're not, but it's right. that little voice inside your head going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
So going back to you listening to those stations, it's one thing to become a fan of the medium. It's another to enter the medium as a career. When and how did you know you wanted to pursue a career in radio? Talk about that.
I was in college. Like I said, music was always on in the house. I was in band. I played clarinet in high school, and not a lot of cause for a professional clarinet player in a rock band. I couldn't sing. Knew I wanted to do something with music, but just had no idea what. The town that I lived in California had a radio station, Woodland in Northern California, just outside Sacramento, had a radio station. FM 102 KSFM was the station there. And I worked in a roller skating rink, and one of the DJs from the station, worked there as well. And so I got to know him, and we actually started to date. And he said, "Hey, do you want to watch me do my show one night?" I'm like, "Sweet." So I go into the studio and I see what he's doing, and I'm like, "I can do that. I could totally do that."
Right.
And so I actually started interning at KSFM when I was in college, and decided that that's what I wanted to do.
And so talk about let's just jump right into your first gig in radio is KSFM in Sacramento in 85, I believe. Is that right?
Actually, that's my first full-time gig.
Okay.
So my father got transferred back to Indiana, and after I had decided I wanted to be in radio, and so I started volunteering my time on the NPR station, because on the weekends and at night they had this thing in the early 80s called Nightwave, and so they would play all this awesome new wave music. And they were always looking for people. And so I, kind of raised my hand, called the program director. He called me in and went, "Hey, yeah, sure, no worries, come on in." And I had this little show, once a week. And one of the local program directors listened and called me and said, "Hey, I've got a weekend gig on WXMG 103.9. It was an AC station. Do you want to come in and talk about it?" And he hired me. R.C. Rogers was the guy who heard me, talking about, the violent femmes and the psychedelic furs, and decided that I could do the same for, Madonna, who was just starting, and Lionel Richie and all that. And so I worked at WXMG from 83 to 85, and like mid 84, they flipped to top 40. So they turned into WZZP Zip 104, and JJ Dooling was the program director, and JJ's a very well-known consultant now. And so it's kind of sweet. He's kind of proud of me. Look at all the things that you did in your life and in your career. So that's kind of cool. So
let's talk about, go ahead.
So after that, once, covered. There was a weekend, or there was an overnight opening at FM 102. And so I had interned there, and I'm like, what the hell? I'll send my tape and my resume, and hired me over the phone. I mean,
wow, over the phone.
Over the phone. And I worked for Rick Gillette, who ended up being the program director of power of WHYT in Detroit in the 90s. And I kind of said to him, "So, what's the deal? After I worked for him for a while, you didn't even fly me out here. You didn't even know if I was going to be a decent part of the team." And he went, "Well, if you come out here and you weren't any good, I'd just fire you."
Well, that's reassuring.
Okay, asshole. Thanks very much. But apparently I did okay. Yeah.
So let's talk about what you were doing on the air. What were you doing? What kind of show? I mean, what were you? Because back then you could kind of show some personality. It wasn't 20 seconds. And what did you do on the air?
I was late nights. So 10 to 2. And
that kind of frees you up a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But, I was like, what, 23, 24, maybe? So just being stupid, just, reading the liner cards and talking about this and talking about that, knowing that I'm talking to a lot of, kids, high school kids, and people who are working overnights, and just learning my craft, because at 23, being on the air in a large market situation, with not a lot of experience behind me, just learning how to be myself on the air. Because that's, you start out imitating this
Right.
person or that person, and just learning how to be me and show who I was on the air.
When and how did you realize, okay, I need to move on to the next job? Because here's something I always contend. As much as you learn at the first job, I feel you learn even more on your second job. What made you decide, okay, I need to move on to a different station? Talk about that.
I did not make that decision.
No? Okay. Sometimes that happens.
That decision was made after Gillette moved to Detroit. There was a new program director who wanted to, shake things up, make things his own. So, just before Christmas, they decided to,
Merry Christmas, you're fired.
Exactly. You get to go home to Indiana for Christmas. Hey, how about that? There were 3 top 40 stations in Sacramento at that time. There were 3 CHR stations. And so, once I was gone, 97 Croy reached out and went, hey, I don't have anything. Bob West was the program director. I don't have anything full-time, but, can you do weekends and swing? And so, that's what I did. I did weekends and swing. And Mike Preston was also very important in my life at that time. He was the program director of KWSS in San Jose. So during the week, I would, if I had a shift, I would work in Sacramento on 97 Croy, and then on the weekends I would drive to San Jose and do 3 shifts.
Wow.
in San Jose. And a friend of mine, I made friends with the overnight person at WLS, Tori Ryder. Just from, she was on the air, I was on the air, I would call her when I got off the air and, kind of talk to her here and there. And she ended up getting a gig at KFRC in San Francisco. And so she moved to San Francisco. She let me stay in her guest room every weekend for 6 months, while I was doing this maniac little research director weekend swing at Croy, and then these 3 weekend gigs in San Jose.
And that was that WKWS, KWSS?
Yeah, KWSS. Yeah,
that's a tongue twister. How do you say that? KWSS. That's not easy.
KWSS. It just a lot of times with the call letters or the name of the station, you just say it over and over and over and over so much that it just becomes natural. It just the first thing that comes out of your mouth.
So one of the things that I was told is, don't work in a format that you really are crazy about. So I kind of, at the time I wasn't really a country fan. What were you, what kind of music were you playing on these radio stations? And was that your cup of tea, or did that have anything to do with it?
It was my cup of tea. They were all CHR stations. So they were all top 40 stations. But I loved every kind of music except country. And so I was definitely a rocker, but still loved top 40 because of, growing up listening to that kind of music. That popular music was something that, that I still really loved.
Now, as a Michigan girl, you start your career in California. Did you think you were going to be a California person and this is where I'm going to be working, or how did that evolve?
It kind of worked out that way, with networking and that kind of stuff. Most of my experience is at California radio stations, but, I always wanted to work in Chicago. You're always looking for, to move up to be that, to that major, make that major market move. And, the thing that you talked about earlier was the fact that, you think you learn what you need to learn, and then you move on to the next place and you move on to the next place. And so each one of my moves, I tried to get a little bit more I tried to learn something else,
Right.
to become the music director, the promotions director, the production director, to be able to learn every single, side of the on-air part of it.
And how did your skills evolve? Did you feel yourself getting better? And did you feel talk about that process, if you would, the nuts and bolts of it.
When you're working for a number of different program directors, they all have, their own ways of doing things and their own ways of motivation and teaching. Air check sessions were, oh God, you just hated them. Because, you're listening to yourself in front of somebody else.
Always awkward. Yeah.
Always just the worst. But you end up, gleaning a little bit of, oh yeah, I can do that. Or, let's try this next time and let's see how this works. So, I was never really good with phones and splicing. I would much rather just, talk.
Sometimes we take for granted that we live in a digital age. Yes, you're not. There's no computers. You're using reel to reels. You're splicing audio together. Talk about, because that, to me, that's amazing, because in a digital age, you do a break and then you go into a song and now you're twiddling your thumbs. Back then, you had to prepare for your next break. Talk about that, if you would.
You had to prep for your next break. You're answering the phones. Obviously, it's a top 40 station. You're always hitting the phones. You want kids to call you. You're coming up with different contests to get something to. I always wanted to make them. It was terrible to make them earn their the prize for that hour, rather than just be caller number 10, and then you're just doing that same, hey, what's your name, where are you calling from, hey, you want this, yay, great, what radio station do you listen to, blah, blah, blah,
They had to be good. It had to be entertaining, right?
Yeah. Right. And so, I would make them, recite lyrics or sing songs and all that kind of stuff. And so you're going and you're cutting and splicing, and you got your tape, you've got all your little pieces of splicing tape lined up, and you've got your, your razor blades, and you're chopping it up, and you've got 3.5 minutes to do so. You've got 3.5 minutes to get your winner, to get your, to get the phoner ready, get it queued up, and boom, with the jingle at the end. So, you were always in motion. It's kind of funny because, when I started at WIRX, when we didn't have any sort of CDs or anything like that, when it was all, audio vault or Dad, I think it was Dad. Man, it was,
it was different.
You get bored. Yeah, you get bored.
Yeah.
Because you're used to constant motion.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So going back, and you're in California. You're working in radio there for a couple years, a couple different radio stations, learning your craft. What happened in 1987 that brought you to Columbus, Ohio?
Well, I was working for KWSS on the weekends in San Jose, and they were part of Nationwide Communications. And WNCI was like the flagship station of Nationwide, and they had a late night opening. And so the first time I, flew from one side of the country to the other for an interview, woke up the next morning, got a call from Bill Richards and said, hey, let's meet for breakfast. I'm like, dude, I already had breakfast. I'm on my way to the station. He's like, okay, great. And, they showed me around. It was one Nationwide Plaza, downtown Columbus, just the best of the best of the best of everything. And so, working at this itty bitty little FM 102 ended up being, the number one station while I was there. But it was, a train wreck of a studio, to go from, something, not high line to, the best of everything. And, 2 different production studios and this big whole newsroom, and just, it was astonishing. And so, I was really lucky to have a good interview and to work, about 6 months, I think, for Bill Richards and then Dave Robbins. Bill went to Houston and to KKBQ, I think. And then Dave Robbins came in and, just revolutionized Columbus radio. WNCI was number one forever and ever and ever. And Dave was always coming up with really awesome, creative promotional ideas so that, the station was always rallying around doing something just really silly and fun.
Now, you're the overnights person. You kind of got a little niche for yourself at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But you go to a number one station. Did you feel kind of a pressure to do something different, or were you just coming into doing your thing, or how did that work? Was there pressure because it was such a number one station?
I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it. Maybe it was just because I'm, young and naive enough, at 25, you're like, this is just the way it is.
Right.
So they hired me to be me, so I'll just be me. Yeah.
So you didn't change your show, you just did you, and you just, as far as, changing it other than growing, but you didn't do anything different. Yeah.
No, not really. Not really.
Because like I said earlier, it's freeing being that shift. It's not like you're the morning person, or even at that time, I think afternoons was the highlight shift. It wasn't mornings at this point. Yeah, but it's different.
At WNCI, it was definitely mornings.
Okay.
They had a morning zoo. This is how much. I don't even know how. This is how amazing the station was. They had a helicopter. They had a traffic copter. Seriously, for a top 40 station in a large market. It was crazy. They had a helicopter.
JoJo Shuddy's loving that.
Right?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so you were again, well, before I get to your next question, I can't help but think when I look at your career, because I thought I've had a lot of jobs. WKRP in Cincinnati, to me, was like the best show because it really explained how we're really carnies. We really are.
Yes. Very much so.
How much did you enjoy that program? Because to me, it was like, okay, a program for us. I can't even imagine being in radio when that show was on.
And I wasn't in radio when that show was on, so that's at least, but it definitely.
But in '87, those reruns were being shown. It was, it was like the Brady Bunch everywhere, shown everywhere.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so you're like, oh yep, that's true. Oh well, you always bust them because they're sitting there talking without headphones on, and the music is coming off of out of the speakers, and you're like, yeah, that would never happen. You can't do that.
I always liked when Johnny Fever said booger.
Booger, exactly. Yes, the one thing that got him fired at another station. He was so free to be able to say it in Cincinnati. That's what's awesome.
But I liked it because they did showcase all the issues, whether it was payola, I think they covered the Who concert. And that's why it made me think of it, because you worked in Columbus and this was obviously Cincinnati down the road. It was kind of, that's what made me think of it to bring it up. But anyway, moving on. So you were at NCI, riding high, number one station. You seemed to find your niche. You're getting a following. You were there for a year and then you went back to California. What happened? What happened
was Nationwide Communications decided that they were going to help bail out a couple of their other markets, and they made some changes on with the schedule. They completely eliminated the 10 to 2, so they went to just your 10 to 3, 3 to 7, 7 to midnight, midnight to 5. So. And I was, I'm sitting in Dave's office, and, not the first time I'd been fired, but,
it's never easy. It's never easy. Yeah.
But I'm the only woman. I'm the only woman, and you're, the only woman who has her own show on your station, and you're getting rid of me. I don't understand this. But that's the way it is. That's radio, baby.
I want to bring.
If you haven't been fired, you're not in radio.
I equate it to being an MLB manager. You're going to get fired, but you can find a job somewhere down the line. I wanted to ask you. You brought up being a woman in radio, and there's, especially at the time, there wasn't a lot of female representation on the radio dials. Did you feeling? I'm sure you were sexually harassed, but what was that like working in an all boys kind of environment and trying to find your way? Did you find that challenging, or did you just like, I'm young, I don't give a shit, and I'm doing my thing? Because you don't
a little of both.
Yeah,
a little of both, because always wanted to be one of the guys. I'm certainly not a girly girl. So talking sports and pop culture and all that kind of stuff. I was definitely always wanted to be one of the guys. There were some situations that came up that you learn how to handle.
What are you going to do? I mean, at the time, I mean, what are you going to do? You report it and hope that something is taken seriously. Both times it was. So that was, I had good management, understanding that just was unacceptable. Yeah, some of my female colleagues that have worked in radio, I've heard horror stories. I mean, as a male, and some of these stories I'm embarrassed by. Even though I had nothing to do with it, it's ridiculous, the sense of entitlement some of those old school radio people had.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
Especially when you think about now. I mean, they would be canceled in a heartbeat, so to speak. So
yeah. I had a program director who wrote a book and about radio, and I was the music director, and he signed the book and said to me in the inscription, read this. This is how a real music meeting runs. And the music meeting in his book was him having sex with the music director, and I was like, really? It's not that you shake your head and ignore it.
The Mad Men, the show, it's not that far removed from that type of behavior. It really wasn't.
Yeah, very, very much so. Yes.
All right. So as I mentioned, you're in Columbus, Ohio. You're getting closer to Chicago. You're getting closer to where you want to be. Boom.
Right.
Now you go back to KYNO in Fresno.
Yeah.
Talk about
to
that.
KYNO to Kino. And Kino, their AM station was actually one of the first Bill Drake boss jock stations. And so it was kind of cool to be at this, at this very historic station, but did mornings there.
Wow, that's a jump.
It was. And they were looking for, a female sidekick to the morning guy. So it was Mercer and Morgan in the morning. And cool. I had a blast doing mornings for a year before they flipped this stupid format to classic rock. So and I was the only jock they kept.
Okay, before we get to that, I do want to ask you,
Sure.
because I mentioned to you, going from nights to mornings, that's different. Did you have to change the way you did things? Talk about that if you would. Or no?
Because I was the sidekick, I wasn't really all that involved in, Bobby would prep the show and go, okay, so here's what we're going to talk about here. Here's what we're going to talk about there. And then, you just do your thing around him. And it was definitely different. It was a lot more regimented, a lot more formatted than, having your own show. And I would still, like once a month, I'd go in and do like a weekend shift just to, keep my chops,
right,
up, keep my skills up so that I could do it myself. Right. Yeah.
Now, I'm always curious because I mentioned at the top you were a program director at WIRX, but that wasn't your first rodeo. Is this where you said, okay, maybe I wanted to get into programming? At what point did you do that? Because that's an entirely different job, being responsible for yourself and your program. Now you know, especially then, a program director was a program director. You were responsible for the whole show. When did you develop a taste to want to pursue that?
When I was a WAOR in South Bend. You know, you always think you can do better than you know than the guy. Well, I can't say you always think, but at that point, I was either you know, too young or still had enough hubris or ego to think that I could do better than the program directors, and I didn't understand why, you know, some of the music choices and the format choices that we had at FM or at WAOR, it just didn't make sense to me. And I got there and started on the weekend after moving back home after San Jose Hot 97.7 didn't renew my contract, and I knew I could do better. So started out on weekends, and then they offered me the night gig in another one of those they offered me the night gig, and it was 7 to midnight in the middle of a cornfield in Niles, Michigan. And the general manager was like, I don't know that I can do this because you're a woman and I don't want a woman out here by herself at night. And so I had to fight that to, I just, my head exploded, and it's like, dude, I could own the station now just because of what you just said.
Right.
You don't want to hire me. I had to fight for that. You don't want to hire me because I'm a girl. That's not cool. And that's, that's in the 90s, for crying out loud. All that stuff was supposed to be done.
This is so cringeworthy. It's not even funny just to think about how much nonsense you had to deal with.
But he did. And, nothing happened. I never had to call anybody. There wasn't any, weird stalkers or anything like that. So, I did nights, and then did middays, and became the, production director, and then became the promotions director. And from the promotions director, just like, I knew that I could program. I knew how I wanted the station to sound. I knew, what promotions and everything. I knew how I wanted it. I could hear it in my head. And so when the opportunity came around, I was really fortunate to be hired as the program director.
Now I have several questions about that, but I don't want to jump because that's when you really started to get into management in South Bend. But before you became program director, as you mentioned, you were production director and promotions director. For people who are listening or watching that haven't worked in radio, talk about what a production director does, and then if you could talk about what you did as a promotions director.
Sure. So the production director is the person who assigns all the commercial production, throughout the air staff, but basically does the bulk of it. And at that time you were getting reel-to-reel tapes, and you were either loading it into the computer or you were, dubbing it onto a cart. So that, when the stop set came, everything was there and ready to go. You would help the new salespeople write copy as well, because invariably it was a 45 second copy that they want, in a 30-second commercial, which you can't do. Or it was 45 seconds for a 60, and you can't do that either. So,
so it's writing copy. Writing copy, I'm sure, is quite difficult if you're getting that much work in.
Yeah, you learn, and you learn to not use the dreaded phrases of, conveniently located, and for all your blank needs, And, you learn to, radio is all about being relatable, all about trying to elicit some feeling from the listener.
Right.
And ad copy's the same way. You have to write it so that they can imagine themselves going to this place and buying this service or this product.
Creating really good theater of the mind. I mean, that's
yes,
what a
very
good
much
production
so.
director does.
Yes.
Now, promotions director, that's a different animal. Talk about that transition, because that's a whole different job.
Very much so. But it's creative in a different way, because, you have to be creative in writing copy and all that. And so you take those copywriting skills and hey, there's a movie coming out. Let's get some tickets and give them away. Let's, name the contest this, it's more about paying attention to pop culture and making the things that the audience is interested in, bringing that to the station, whether it's a contest, whether it's I don't know quite how to explain it. It's just the promotions director has so much say about how you give things away, how you talk about something.
You're imaging the station for all intents and purposes.
Yes, very much. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. Yes, you're imaging the station, because it's everything that your listener is interested in. You want that on the station. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
In writing the promo copy and producing the promos for all of the contests, it is, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of creative. It's a lot of sitting down and brainstorming with the air staff and going, hey, what do you guys think? What should we do? How should we do this? It's collaborative, but it's also a big job that's on, one person's shoulders.
I've always had mad respect for promotions people, because pretty much every radio station I've ever worked at, and I think a lot of people can attest it, there's always some kind of bumping of the heads between sales and on air. And promotions, that's, you kind of bridge the gap. Talk about the relationship between a good promotions director and a sales staff. How important is that?
It's incredibly important. And because they're the people that you're going to say, hey, we want to give away, we want to give away a car. Let's figure out how we can do that. Do you guys have do you have an account that would do that? We want to give away a trip. How can we get the funds together to do this? So you're definitely working with the sales department to put together, the promotional, package that says, their name will be involved, every hour that we talk about it, they'll hear the sponsor name and they get these, this many commercials and this many promos and all that. It's having the sales department on your side is imperative, no matter what position you're in.
Yeah. Did you ever find yourself bumping heads and saying, that's not a good fit? This is not what we want. I mean, can you give us maybe some inside pool on one of the stories that stands out?
As program director at WIRX, I was also the promotions director. It was part of the deal. And I walked in the door at WIRX and went, we're not giving away one sub coupon. No, we're not giving away $5 of a prize and expecting somebody to drive, a half hour to come pick up a sub coupon. No, we're giving away $25 or $50 at a minimum. We can't keep doing this. It makes us sound little. And the thing about Benton Harbor that you well know, but the people who are listening and watching may not understand, is it's right on the banks of Lake Michigan, and every Chicago radio station comes booming across Lake Michigan. And so you have to raise your game. Obviously we're not going to, have the same sort of prizes that they're going to have, on huge radio stations in Chicago, but you have to sound like it. You have to sound huge. You have to sound, like you're not nickel and diamond.
So obviously you got most of your management experience at South Bend, but you're there as production director, then promotions director. You're there 5 years. You're learning all this stuff other than just being on the radio and being entertained. What's that conversation like? Did you ask to be a program director? Did they tap you on the shoulder and said, we want you to jump up here? Talk about your transition into program director at WAOR.
So there had been a management change in the radio station after like 40 years. And the new general manager was, 26, 27. And wanted to shake things up. They dismissed the program director who was there, and it was, so we've got a position. Do you want to be involved? I'm like, yeah, I want to interview for it. I definitely want to be the PD, and ended up getting it. I don't know how many people they interviewed. I think they just wanted to keep status quo. And so, I didn't really care why I got the job. I just got the job. And then, just kind of ran with it for the year that I was there before we were sold. And there were, obviously changes made then.
Before we move on to your IRX, I think it's fascinating that you started your experience there at AOR being patronized because you're a woman. And I don't mean to say woman like you're not, but I mean because it's ridiculous. Yes. And then you leave there as arguably the top position. That had to be quite an experience. I mean, you're there 7 years and you ran the gamut of jobs there. But talk about vindication, no?
Yeah, it very much felt vindicated. At least that it was nice that someone recognized that that I had the chops to do it, that I had the ability, and that they just gave me the shot. It was like, okay, so it kind of goes back to to Gillette at FM 102 when I asked him, so what happened if I just didn't work out? You hire me over the phone, and he's like, well, I just fire you, and you just kind of figure out that that's just radio. If it's not working out, they decide that they're going to go in a different direction, and they bring you in on a Friday or whatever, and just kind of go, okay, sorry, see ya. Clean out your desk.
Now, one of the best experiences I've ever had in radio was when I went to Benton Harbor St. Joe, and
right,
regardless of where it's at now, that time and period when I was hired there, it was just, to me, it was what radio was supposed to be, and especially have it in a small market was baffling to me because it was run like a media, and I think a lot of it had to do with the shareholders were from Chicago and LS and was from that ilk. So, but did you feel that way when you talk about you moving over to IRX? Because now it's just over the border from Indiana to Michigan. You went from South Bend, which is a half hour away from Benton Harbor. Talk about the move from South Bend to St. Joseph.
Well, so the program director at WAOR, when I got hired, part-time, was John Vance. And John had gone to a couple of different stations, and then was back in the area and was programming WIRX and WITZ. And he was looking for somebody. And, I reached out to John. He actually was looking for a program director for Y Country.
Okay.
For YTZ. And I reached out to John after the ownership change at WAOR, and I went, "Hey, dude, you're here. I need something to do," which is kind of how I reached out to him at WAOR. I called him and I kind of went, "Hey, here, I'm looking for a gig," and he was like, "What? Nobody in South Bend ever talked like that." And so it was kind of funny that it turned like kind of full circle.
Yeah.
And he's, WAOR that year was up for Small Market Radio Station of the Year at the NAB. And so I went with the morning guy and the general manager and the sales manager. We went to the NAB, and I was on a panel at the NAB, which was kind of fun, about making, small market radio sound big market.
Right.
And so all this time I'm, calling John Vance, and I are going back and forth. And he's kind of like, "Hey, let me think about this, because I might have we might be able to work this out." Cause I knew he was looking for a country PD, and I knew that wasn't going to work for me. And so he ended up, giving up the AOR, or sorry, the WIRX PD gig, and given that to me. And so, walking into WIRX and the radio stations of Southwest Michigan, there were 5-6 stations there.
Yeah.
Each one of the stations had had a ridiculous local presence.
Yeah.
John Vance got Gail Olson, the general manager, the president general manager, to buy a freaking Hummer, for crying out loud.
Right. How many small market stations Hummer do that, right?
Right. I mean, it was insane. And, they had the giant jam box for Y Country, and every station was always out, always doing something. I get hired, and Gail said to me, "If you want to broadcast every single day from the beach with the Hummer, do it. Go do whatever you want. Be out in the community. I need you to be part of the community."
Wow.
And it was astonishing the amount of equipment and studios
and support
that were in that little bit, and support that was in that little building. The audio chain at WIRX is the best I have ever heard in my life. I can go, you can go anywhere, and the sound coming out of your car speakers, WIRX, better than any station I've ever heard.
Now you had, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I was just going to say that IRX, you, I don't know, did you bring in John Jay to do the morning, or was he doing
No. John had been there for a long time. And you
talk about a solid morning show. That morning show
right.
would have been number one in most places.
And I was completely astonished that he just wanted to stay where he lived, because he could have been major market. That show could have been major market. He is an amazing storyteller, and just one of the funniest people on the face of the planet. And so, I walked into that gig going, I don't have to do anything with the morning show, except listen and enjoy. And then, every once in a while, try to correct, just a little bit. But there wasn't a lot to do. It was more like, okay, John, how can I support you and help you have the show that you want?
And, you talked about him wanting to stay home. Another DJ that he's turned into a friend of mine. I've had him on the podcast. And you got him when he was 19. Corey Winfield, to me, was another great who just seemed to be a natural at that type of format, and just so good on the air.
Yeah, because Corey, another great sense of humor. But Corey was just so natural. didn't feel, when you listened to him, you knew you were listening to him, that he was just talking. He wasn't trying to be anybody. It was just Corey. And just so smart and so funny and just really quick. I was very lucky to.
You had some great talent. You had some great. Another person I've had on this podcast, and you mentioned you listened to it, Larry Heron, who's gone on to Hollywood. You want to talk about a guy who coming in and would do anything, and he was on the John Jay show. But my question, I guess, is how do you, as someone who's supposed to supervise the on-air talent, you had that environment comes from you. Do what you want because I know I trust you. I mean, not every PD has that. Talk about that.
Well, but I mean, to that point, I mean, when you walk into an established station and you don't need to make any changes, oh my gosh, that's the greatest thing ever. And then you get to learn, you get to know these people and learn their strengths. So, you cater to their strengths and you try to help them with their weaknesses. And you hope that they respect you enough to do that. It was kind of nice because, I had been at, WAOR for 7 or 8 years. And so they all knew me. They had all, listened to me. In fact, Corey had tried to get hired. He had come in for an interview for, I don't remember, it might've been a night gig. And so I didn't end up hiring him, but I knew who he was, and I knew who John was, and they knew who I was. So when I came in as program director, it was really nice to have the whole staff, not just of WIRX, but of the entire station, just, be very genuine and saying, we're really excited to have you here.
How did your job evolve over the because you were, as long as you were at South Bend, you were at IRX. How long were you at IRX at the stations? Well,
99 to 2005. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were there quite a bit, but you also you mentioned all the other radio stations. How did because you obviously turned IRX into a powerhouse in Southwest Michigan, but they gave you more responsibilities as time went on. Talk about that.
Right. But I was. I was incredibly protective of IRX, when they would want somebody from my staff, if you will, from Rock 107 to try to voice track another station, I'd go, no, you can't do it. There's rock credibility.
It takes away.
Yes. You really couldn't do it. You couldn't have one of the rock guys, working on a country station because they were so diametrically opposed at that particular point in time. And so once the other program directors understood and the operations manager understood that was, I was going to do that for IRX, when Jim Gifford stepped down from the program director of the Coast of the Hot AC station, I kind of raised my hand and said, I can do that. I've done it before. I've worked at that kind of station, or at least, a top 40 station, a CHR station. And, I'm really interested in doing that. And so they allowed me the opportunity to run 2 stations, and two of their 3 biggest stations. Right. I was programming, and brought in a morning guy to pair with the woman who had been with Robin Van Dyke. Yes. Robin had been in that market forever, and she was a legend.
Another great talent, right?
The one thing that I wanted to make sure of was that it wasn't the Guy and Robin show, because Robin was the star. The people in town knew her. Right. It made so much more sense. So, we hired Rob Rose. And so it was Robin and Rob. It was Robin and Rob.
And it worked out well. I mean, it really did.
It did. And you know, I wanted Robin to be the star. She needed to be the host. She needed to be the person who was directing everything. And that was a first for, you know, for the market, you know, to have a woman host of a morning show.
Another thing that happened while you were there, and you mentioned it earlier, we go from analog to digital. How did that change radio from your purview?
It changed radio in a good way and in a not so good way. It allowed you the opportunity to voice track in a good way and in a not so good way. I did afternoons for a while, and was so adamant about staying there till 7 o'clock, 3 to 7. That's when I needed to be there. But then became pretty proficient at voice tracking, so much so that one of my favorite anecdotes is that the general manager comes into my office one day, and he said, "So I came to talk to you yesterday." I'm like, "Okay." He said, "At like 6:30." He goes, "But you weren't in the studio." I'm like, "No, I was voice tracked." He goes, "I can never tell when you're voice tracked or when you're live."
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so that was, that's kind of like a badge of honor for me.
Well, that's high praise, because I much like you, and I'm sure you're going to say the same thing, is that's a different skill set. It's completely different. It's not easy. But at that particular point in time, you're recording it. It's way different than like commercial production, because you can stumble and you can, make a mistake and laugh and then just keep going, because that's how you sound human. That's how you, you don't sound like you're voice tracked. So yeah, it was definitely different. And I really struggled with not being able to segue songs. Right.
Because you have to, I really struggled with that. And in fact, when I started at IRX, we pretty much re-recorded the entire database of songs, because they just had them fading out forever and ever and ever. And you're like, you can't do that. That's not how you run a board. You don't run a board with it fading out forever and ever. And, so yeah, there was a good 3-4 month project of re-recording everything back into the hard drive. And I think a lot of that stuff is still in the hard drive at IRX.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about before we move on from IRX is one thing for me that was cool when I worked at WITZ doing the morning show with Wild Bill, is the acts that we got to rub elbows with, and whether it be us going to Nashville or people bringing, I know Tesla, you guys had Tesla come in. Talk about some.
No, we didn't have Tesla.
No,
I
not
Tesla.
Not Tesla.
So
no, Great White. I misspoke. You guys, Great White.
Yeah.
Yes, Great White came in.
Great White was at the Venetian Festival. They were fun.
One of the highlights of my career is being on stage introducing the Beach Boys in front of Silver Beach. That's
right.
But I want to ask you: do you have a story or two of times that you've gotten to rub elbows with these rock bands? I'm sure you have more than a few.
Yeah, and that literally was, I was reason number 2 that I wanted to get into radio, because number 1, I needed to do something with music, and number 2, I there was no other way I was going to meet Van Halen. And so when I was at AOR, I actually did end up getting to meet Van Halen on the Balance tour in Fort Wayne.
Cool.
I took my brother. We did the backstage thing ahead of time. They took pictures. I mean, it's like 30 whole seconds, right? You get 30 whole seconds with them. And it's, standing. So Alex, Mike, and then Ed, and then Eddie and Sammy in the picture. My brother's standing next to me. He's like, "Where do you want me to stand in the picture?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't care. You can stand on your head. I'm standing in between Sam and Ed. I don't care. you can do whatever you want. And so he goes, oh, I'll stand over here so we can balance it. Beautiful. That's great. You know, you walk up, my brother is a little shorter than you are. He's like 6'2", but he was a big guy, especially then. Eddie Van Halen sees him coming and will not shake his hand normally because he knows his hand is going to get just smushed. So shakes his hand, you know, like a bro handshake. You know, he goes through the line and I just look at Eddie and I'm like, oh my God, I can't.
Do you know who you are?
I am so cool under that sort of pressure.
But not for that.
You know, for that, it was just like, I love you guys. And Sam, I love you guys so much. And I listen to you forever. And, you know, all that stupid stuff that everybody says. We get lined up, take the picture. You know, I kind of talked to Michael and I just look at Alex. Alex Van Halen was, you know, a god to me. I had a crush on him forever and ever. And we start to walk out and my brother goes, she's had a crush on you since she was 16. And so Alex is like, really?
That's
I'm like, yes. And he's like, well, that's kind of cool. And, you know, the record company had, you know, was taking all these pictures. And so they had sent you like, they sent the one before you and the one after you in case they didn't get you. Right. So I got an extra picture of a friend of mine and who was just ahead of us in line. So I got to give that to him. And then the picture afterwards, we ruined because Alex was talking to us. He wasn't looking straight at he wasn't looking straight at the camera. So it was kind of funny.
So I can trust that you're a Sammy guy over a Dave guy. Me too.
Yes.
Okay.
Dave
was great.
David Lee Roth was amazing. For the time, but
Sammy.
Sam definitely up to the musical value, and you know, yeah.
I don't know the answer to this question, so I might be asking a void question. But another cool thing that I discovered when I moved to St. Joe, Benton Harbor, was that Muhammad Ali had a house in Niles.
Yes.
Did you ever have any run-ins with the champ? Because I did, and it was the most amazing experience I've ever had. But talk about any rub elbows situations you had with Ali.
So the Coast was doing a remote at the Pump House.
That's the Pump House. Great food.
Yeah. They were doing a remote at the Pump House, and I went to check and, you know, make sure that everything was happening cool. And Muhammad Ali was there. He was there standing in the doorway waiting to get into the restaurant with his wife, with Lonnie, right?
I think that's her name, yeah.
With his wife. And I locked eyes with him as I was getting ready to leave and smiled, and he smiled back, and he did a magic trick.
Oh. Jeez, oh Pete.
Because he was nonverbal at that point. He did a little magic trick, and you know,
he was so great, wasn't he?
Just this amazing energy and this light around this man, and he was my dad's hero. He was my father's hero, and I jet out of the place, pick up my cell, call my dad. Dad, I just met the champ. I met the champ. He's like, really? I'm like, yes, I just met the champ. It was the coolest thing ever. I think we all had our own little moments with him. That was just spectacular.
You've mentioned a couple, but do you have a favorite moment? And I'm sure it was either in South Bend or IRX because you spent the most time there. Can you share a moment or two that you'd look back and say, I can't fucking believe that happened. That was the coolest thing I've ever experienced. Because I'm sure you have a few of them.
Oh, golly. So at WAOR, we did this Christmas is for Kids promotion, and we raised a bunch of money with, it was the South Bend Silverhawks at the time, to buy presents for kids for Christmas. And there was a bar downtown called Heartland that we kind of took over and had all of these little stations for kids. They go and they get a, they'd have something to eat. They'd get their toys at the end, but they'd play this game and they'd get to do that. And they get to sit on, Santa's lap and get a picture with Santa. The Silverhawks brought their fast pitch, and our morning guy had a connection through Notre Dame with Jamie Moyer, who was a Seattle Mariner at the time, pitcher. And his daughter was Digger Phelps, the basketball coach from Notre Dame. His daughter was, Jamie's wife was Digger's daughter. And so they were actually in town, and Jamie Moyer came and showed all these little kids how to throw a ball.
Wow.
And I'm standing there with Jamie Moyer, who arguably, Hall of Fame,
sure,
just this amazing ball player who kind of equates his fame and mine on the same level.
Wow.
Because I had met him I had seen him at a hockey game, a Notre Dame hockey game, like a couple of weeks before. And I said, hey, I saw you guys at the game, and I didn't really want to, mess with you because, dude, you're out with your family. He goes, no, you should have. He said, you know how it is. We go out into the public and, people come up, and that's just part of the thing. When we go out in public and people recognize us, right, and they come and say hi, that's just part of the thing. I work on the radio in South Bend, Indiana, and you're a major league pitcher. Our fame is the same amount. I thought it was so funny to me. I just cracked up. So that was really cool. And just putting on the shows that we did at WIRX, doing, having Rockstock for 5 years, and, bringing bands, like Theory of a Dead Man, and, and oh God, who did we do? Jackal and 38
Jackal,
Special, and Jackal. That was hilarious. And just being able to do that.
Have you ever met anybody like James Dupree? That guy is a crazy man.
I know, right? 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 And the other thing is, on one of the shows, Kip Winger came, and he was just doing an acoustic set, which we found out about the day before the show. We thought he was bringing a whole band. And so he's doing the interview with John Jay, and John's like, so we're really excited to see the band. And he's like, no, I'm not bringing a band. It's just me and my guitar, and we're going to play acoustically. And we're like, well, what? What? And so I go into to Gail, and Gail said, well, yeah, I asked you if you wanted Kip Winger solo. I said, solo doesn't mean acoustic. Solo means he's not bringing Winger. It's just, And so, and I was a huge Winger fan. Oh my gosh, I loved that band. Hair band. They were like my number one hair band. And so had it been 10 years before and I wasn't the program director, I would have hung out with Kip Winger all day long like he wanted me to.
Right.
He kept following me around Rockstock going, hey, Shelley, hey, let's do this. Hey, Shelley, let's do that. Hey, Shelley. And I'm like, oh my God.
I got stuff to do, man.
I got stuff to do. I'm telling Kip Winger no, which I never thought would ever be in my vocabulary ever.
That's
so
crazy.
Yeah, just cool stuff like that.
I got to tell you, between the conglomerates buying up radio stations and, of course, the internet, that's created far fewer opportunities for radio people like yourself. So as I wrap up, I want to ask you, obviously radio is not what it was, especially back in the day. From your purview, how would you, if you had a magic wand, how would you change radio to make it a better product in 2023?
I would break up the conglomerates and make it so much more local, because, I have friends who work for the big companies who are voice tracking in five different major markets. And I don't understand that. There's no connection with the listener. It's such a product anymore. It's not that connection. And that, that's the heart of radio, if you ask me, that connection with the listener. And so, I that's what I would do. I would break it up and make it local again. And give those opportunities back, because there's no minor league system. You get hired overnight and you learn your craft that way, with nobody listening.
Right.
And there's no such thing as nobody's listening anymore.
Right. Well, you've obviously been on a radio like myself for a couple of years now, but what's next for Shelley Morgan? What's next for you? What do you got going on in your life now?
I actually am right. I am I run the customer service department of the customer or the warranty department of a vehicle manufacturer. We manufacture delivery vehicles, so FedEx, UPS, Amazon.
Cool.
So I am working customer service and have an amazing team. And it's definitely a challenge in these very not nice times. People aren't kind anymore.
Yeah.
It's not my fault that that the air conditioner doesn't work on your truck, but man, I'm going to do my best to help you, but you don't have to yell at me for it. Let me help you. So
people reach for that anger a lot quicker than they used to, it seems to me.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. They do. It's 0 to 60 in 1 second, as opposed to, give me a minute to help you.
Me and my wife, I try to get her over to St. Joe every couple of years for the Berrien County Youth Fair. You ever get over there much anymore?
Oh gosh, yeah. Because where I live, it's only about 45 minutes away. I still have friends there, so usually about once a month or once every 6 weeks, I'm over there, just going and having lunch and headed to the beach and just looking around and seeing how different it is. It's building up and getting beautiful. It's getting even more beautiful than it was. Benton Harbor is just. Awesome. It's vibrant again, and so it's really nice to see that.
Shelley, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your broadcast story. You were awesome.
Oh, thanks very much. I really appreciate the ask, Ron.
Thank you again to Shelley Morgan O'Brien, and thank you for checking out Radio Dayz the Podcast. Today's show was brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage. Are you looking to buy or refinance your home and have questions that need answers now? Call Brian Allure, 810-444-6466. Today's show is produced by Ron Robinson Studios. If you need professional marketing videos, photography, headshots, maybe you need drone content from a licensed drone pilot, head over to ronrobinsonstudios.com. You can also hear previous episodes of Radio Dayz there as well. And if you'd like to learn more about the upcoming documentary about the history of radio, Radio Dayz, 101 Years of Radio, click on the Radio Dayz the Movie tab under the Documentaries tab at ronrobinsonstudios.com. Thanks for checking out the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.
You can't go! All the plants are gonna die!